Hello and welcome to Season 12, Episode 13 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop,
I'm Mark Bishop.
and we are, of course, reading Allan Bloom's The Closing of the American Mind, this time reading a part of a chapter, now moving into part 3 of the book, where he's specifically talking about the university. So we've had this sort of framework of what are sort of the philosophical imports to the United States that sort of are related to the university. Now we're actually explicitly talking about the university, and this time talking about what is sort of the role of the education in society. Part of this much longer chapter. It's like a 90-page chapter, it seems like, or 70-page chapter, titled From Socrates' Apology to Heidegger's Rektoratsrede. So going through a history of education there. And this time he really talks about Tocqueville quite a bit on democratic intellectual life, and then turns to the relation between thought and civil society. I thought it was a good chapter. I mean, I think it's a lot of the things we've been talking about, and it's nice to see him talk more specifically about the education environment a little bit more. But no, I thought it was a good section that we read.
Yeah, it to me it was like a defense of the university system.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
if run well, why it's important, why he believes in it, and then I like how he started off, which is
hmm
kind of one of my pet issues I've talked about before, is inspirational architecture. Because you
right.
mentioned when he was a kid, 15-year-old, that's a kid, visiting the University of Chicago.
hmm
It's like the neo-Gothic or whatever
Yeah,
they were.
very similar to the architecture style down here at University of Florida.
Yeah, I've never been to the University of Chicago, and I was going to look up pictures of it, but that I didn't. But
Oh,
I
that's a shame.
kind of generally kind of know what Gothic
Right.
would look like. So I had a picture in my mind.
Yes.
I had a picture in my mind of a Gothic structure with a Chicago skyline.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I just pulled up a picture. That's that's great. I
Um,
pulled up a picture, like the red sort of tile roofs and sort of the gray fronts with, all the sort of towers and stuff like that. So it
yeah,
is very pretty. I guess Florida is more sort of the red brick sort of structure and things like that, but very much sort of in that Gothic style, the older buildings on campus. But I think he's right about his what?
Gothic style buildings at University of Florida.
Oh yeah, like all of the old campus buildings. I don't know if you remember the university auditorium
I
building that
do
we
remember
walked past
that.
that
That was
looks like
like
a
a
giant church. But yeah, a
church.
lot of the old dorms,
Yeah.
kind of with
Okay.
those sort of archway, styles and things like that with the towers and everything. A lot of the older buildings are. Some of the newer buildings are just kind of red brick rectangles and are kind of ugly. But
I think that's beautiful.
some of them were beautiful. Some of them are really, really ugly.
Well, there's still red brick,
That's
which
true. Some of them, some
which
of them aren't even that anymore.
I don't remember. I don't remember a lot of red brick buildings because your youngest brother and I did a tour of Mizzou,
Right.
and Mizzou, their quad reminded me a lot of University of Florida. You know, a lot of red
hmm
brick buildings and how they had spaced out and that kind of stuff.
Right.
Although UF, I think, is much bigger. It seems
Yeah.
much bigger.
Oh yeah.
Although I don't. I mean, Mizzou's a big school. They have a
Well,
lot of
Mizzou has, and we have almost double, I think, their student
really.
population. We have over 60,000 students,
Oh, yes,
and
that is
Mizzou
double.
has, yeah, like 30,000. Yeah, so it's a huge campus.
Less than
But
30.
yeah,
Yes.
I do like his point here because he starts by telling this story, because he says, it was really the architecture that drew him in and made him sort of fall in love with this place, and that's where Allan Bloom ended up teaching for a lot of his career, was at the University of Chicago. But he says, in the course of my education, I've learned that they were fake, referring to the actual architecture, Gothic architecture, and that Gothic is not really my taste, but they pointed toward a road of learning that leads to the meeting place of the greats. There one finds examples of a sort not likely to be seen around one, without which one could neither recognize one's own capacities nor know how wonderful it is to belong to the species. And he goes this sort of long discussion of this because he's saying, well, the architecture points to something. It points to, what the university is meant to be. And if you have these beautiful buildings, it kind of shows you, how different the university life can be from, the sort of, just going about your daily business, right? It should be something categorically different
Yes.
than everyday life. And you should be able to meet, these brilliant people as you're walking around in a university.
Well, I especially think it's true for university. I've come to the. I think I mentioned like Tucker Carlson kind of keyed me into this. He's kind of gotten a little bit more odd lately. Um, his maniacal laugh is there's something wrong with that. That's a whole different discussion. Um, but I think there's a lot to that of having architecture that inspires you for deeper thought or
Right.
meaningful contemplation. I think it's true And it's often mentioned like if you're on a retreat or something, if you have a
Right.
quiet time or some thoughtful period of time, it does make a difference what your environment is, and it probably shouldn't, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, but it is so true. I mean, to go to a beautiful place, and I think it's really true when people say, you need to turn off that computer and go touch grass.
Yeah.
Something something meaningful about
Hmm.
that. And again, I don't know really why. I can't really articulate why
Right.
it matters. I mean, you're thinking the same thoughts, presumably,
Right.
but
Because I
he's
like,
on to something.
yeah.
I like his defense of the
Hmm.
university system, and I think it does kind of inspire people.
Right.
And
Because
I
he
think,
says, yeah, kind of on the architecture point, he says it like points towards a tradition, right? It's
yes,
meant to evoke like a traditional architecture. He says then this nation's impulse, talking about the U.S., is towards the future, and tradition seems more of a shackle to it than an inspiration. Reminiscences and warnings from the past are our only monitor as we careen along our paths. He's saying like literally the architecture can help remind us of tradition. He continues a little bit
yes,
later. He says, talking about the university, he says it made a distinction between what is important and not important. It protected the tradition not because tradition is tradition, but because tradition provides models of discussion on a uniquely high level. Right? It's not
mm,
just because these things are old that we think that there's something to be learned from them. It's because they have something that can be learned in them, and that's why we should keep talking about these sort of great works and things like that, and keep studying philosophy and literature as more than just entertainment, right? Because it does mean something
yes,
um, that can be reflected in the architecture.
yes. And he segues into more his defense of the university system generally within a democracy, which I thought was really an interesting
Yeah.
take on it. That and I don't disagree with what he was saying. It's just mentioning Tocqueville
Hmm.
and how almost like warning about the philosophy of reason
Right.
the founders had and how destructive that could be to a free people.
Hmm.
And I hadn't really considered that before. As far as in a democracy, that dissenting views um, aren't as tolerated when there's kind of more of a utilitarian
Right.
philosophical approach to these things.
Right. Because he says, he moves on into the section when he's talking about Tocqueville. He says, the great democratic danger, according to Tocqueville, is enslavement to public opinion, right? Just sort of like soft totalitarianism and things like that he talks about a lot. But he makes an interesting point where he's talking about, the specific structure of democracy, which democracy is supposed to level out, sort of the different, sort of statuses of people, right? We all have the same rights, all the same voting privileges and stuff. And he says that creates a very different intellectual life than either like a theocracy or an aristocracy. He says, churchmen for whom divine revelation is the standard, or aristocrats in whom the reverences for antiquity are powerful, fathers who always tend to prefer the rights of the ancestral to those of reason, are all displaced in favor of the equal individual. Even if men seek authority, they cannot find it where they used to find it in other regimes. Thus, the external impediments to the free exercise of reason have been removed in democracy. Right? If you don't have sort of this ruling class, I think is kind of what he's talking about here. You
Yeah.
have this much different intellectual climate where sort of everybody's ideas are equal to one another, and that is reflected in the intellectual life as well.
Yes.
I guess you have no thoughts on that topic.
No, I agree. This is a great. I don't know if this is part of the quote. Which page were you quoting from?
246.
Okay, that's where I was at.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Did you read that the great democratic danger, according to
Yes,
Tocqueville, is
yes.
enslavement? Okay, that's the key part. And then you kept talking. This is the enslavement to public opinion. That's I think the money quote, which I have.
Yeah,
You kept
yes.
but uh, uh, I think that is a key point that
Hmm.
you need this you need a system that sets up to allow for dissenting opinions within a university system in a democracy to keep um, that vibrant exchange of ideas
Hmm.
because otherwise if you don't if you just focus on the utilitarian aspect of it or the what benefits the most of us. I think he's right about that. I think you need to
Right,
have that. Of course, the university system that we have now doesn't do that at all um, because it's not based upon
right,
using common sense or even research, and they don't even know.
right.
I doubt that any. I wonder how many people that teach at universities even know how the university system was set up and for what purpose.
Yeah.
I think they do. I mean, I doubt
No,
it.
no, not
Not,
really.
not, I mean, some of them, of course, would, but I doubt that they've really contemplated, hey, what's our role
Hmm.
here? You
Yeah.
know,
I've been reading some of St. John Henry Newman's The Idea of a University. We have a
hmm,
reading group growing on that, and I've only read like his preface and the first chapter so far, so we're still very early on in it. But I know sort of the general theme of the book, and he's writing in 18, I want to say 60, no, 1840 maybe, mid 19th century, and he's describing basically all of the problems that like we have with the modern university right now. He says like as we keep moving farther and farther down this path, it's just going to become like a purely you study one subject and you don't get informed about theology, you don't get this philosophical background. He says that's completely antithetical to the idea of the university. That's not what the university is for. And he's making essentially the very same arguments that Allan Bloom is making throughout here, that you
interesting.
need this sort of bigger liberal arts project if you actually want to have a university, rather than just sort of weird sort of modern apprenticeship is almost what it is, or trade school for a lot of these programs, and not really like a university education as Newman would have understood it.
What's kind of interesting. And today, earlier today was the Charlie Kirk Memorial.
Right.
I don't want to go to that rabbit hole, but I did watch or listen to a lot of the speakers. I was at work working on a project, and I could kind of have divided attention and listen to a lot of speakers. Of course, Charlie Kirk famously was an early dropout of the university system, so he didn't have
Hmm.
a degree. And of course, people would, oh, you don't have a degree, why should we listen to you? But he read a lot and he
Right.
studied a lot. And I didn't know how many of these courses, these online courses he took at Hillsdale, that he had Larry Arndt, who's
Hmm.
still the chairperson or dean or whatever he is.
President, yeah, I think of the university, yeah.
And he was one of the speakers, really effective, quiet, brief speaker today. But he mentioned, he said Charlie Kirk would text him the certificate of completions for different correspondence courses. I think he said there was like 31 of them. And
Wow.
and I think Charlie Kirk had talked about publicly how he'd taken Aristotle courses or taken the same course a couple times,
Hmm.
so. But having said all that, really a lot of the speakers talked about a lot of things that we talk about, which are there are certain things as an objective truth. There is a value to beauty and to studying the things. Of course, a lot of references to the Bible. It really was um, um, like a revival, like an
Right.
old style tent revival. And I mentioned, I don't know how many seasons ago, that America was overdue for a religious revival.
Yeah.
Been periods of time where there were Pentecostal or other religious popular revivals, and
Right.
I'm not saying it's going to happen this time, but when you have millions of people streaming this thing and it's one after the other, but they were talking about the value of the truth and the
Hmm.
beautiful and those kind of timeless values. And it was refreshing to hear that, because
Right.
that's really what the universities are supposed to be instilling.
Hmm.
And I get a little hopeful sometimes. I have a hope that we could reform the university system, because we have these resources there, and they can be so great, to reaffirm these values. And as this author is indicating, uh, there's a need for it. In order to have a functioning republic, he calls it a democracy, but a republic where people vote on issues, you have to be reasonably well informed, and not only on the issues of today, but some sort of historical references and
Right.
philosophical principles. Um,
And I think that's what he
yeah,
says kind of on 247, where he says, some kind of authority is often necessary for most men and is necessary at least sometimes for all men.
sure.
In the absence of anything else to which to turn, the common beliefs of most men are almost always what will determine judgment. That is just where tradition used to be most valuable. Without being seduced by its undemocratic and anti-rational mystique, tradition does provide a counterpoise to and a repair from the merely current, and contains the petrified remains of old wisdom, along with much that is not wisdom. The active presence of a tradition in a man's soul gives him a resource against the ephemeral, the kind of resource that only the wise can find simply within themselves. He says, I
Yeah.
think that's very true. It's like you just keep getting swept up if you don't have anything else to turn to, and just,
Yeah.
well, what is current and what has sort of a big group of people sort of decided is okay. Right. And you see
Yeah.
that a lot in a lot of these sort of debates about things. It's like, oh, well, haven't you heard? Science has decided, that this is the case, right? Didn't you just see that study from 3 years ago or 2 years ago or whatever that says, there are this many genders or what have you. You can pick any sort of number of topics along those lines, but it's like we just keep looking at what is the most current rather than, maybe there are things that we've, some sources that have talked about these things for, 2,000 years. We don't pay any attention to those, right? We just look for what is sort of agreed upon as an okay thing to believe right now.
Yeah. And kind of echoing that, where he talks about that need for tradition to make those decisions. It's kind of a grounding, it has a kind of a grounding effect when you have a traditional, even if it's within just a subgroup of people. Well, this is traditionally what we've always done. And quite frankly, I think what I was thinking when I was reading this, I think that's part of the reason why so many people, um, like the Never Trumpers, really hate Trump. They kept talking about he's breaking the norms
Right.
and their traditions, and it was really distressing and disturbing to them because those political norms where you can't talk about, why aren't the NATO allies actually funding NATO? That was, oh my gosh, you can't say that. You can't say, well, why are we even in NATO? Well,
Right.
that's breaking a norm. And so in an odd way, they were more traditionalists than what they would view as traditionalist Christians,
Mm-hmm.
trad wives or trad husbands, those
Right.
memes that are going on, than a lot of the Trump supporters, because
Right.
these kind of weird false traditions. But then when you ask, well, why do we have that tradition?
Mm-hmm.
Why do we have a filibuster where nobody has to filibuster? I mean,
Right.
I like the idea of a filibuster. Where you have to have 60 votes to get the person to shut up. But I like the old Mr. Smith goes to Washington filibuster. You could gum it up, but there's a limitation on it based upon how long you could hold it in. Now I have to go to the bathroom, and how long you can speak, or hand
Mm-hmm.
it off to another person to take over and speak. Next,
Right.
because that slows down the process, and you're still debating and you're still discussing. But the modern filibuster is, I'm going to filibuster, and they send
Right.
like a note to the majority leader of the Senate. And they don't actually do anything,
Right.
and so that's not a tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's not a norm.
Mm-hmm.
That's fake and false, and
Right.
and so. But anyways, so we get back to the book. I think he's right that, like, without those traditions, a lot of people, including myself, need to establish. It's almost like you have to you get exhausted thinking about everything.
Right.
It's like, oh, now I have to make this decision. I have to consider all the options, the other decision. If you have a certain level set of traditions that are generally accepted, you don't have to reevaluate everything every day. And that's why we have a Republican, not a democracy, because not everybody can pay attention to all these, and not everybody
Right.
wants to pay attention to every issue. And so he makes a great point that the danger is if you don't have an aristocracy, which he says on, like, effectively, it says in 248, not only slavery but aristocracy, monarchy, and theocracy were laid to rest by the Declaration of the Constitution, which is
Mm-hmm.
100% correct. And so you've eliminated this structure that would have those traditional elements in it.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's just, okay, we just decide based upon our own individual reason and freedom of thought on every issue through our elected representatives. And
Right.
he's making the case, well, we need a university system that's kind of separate and protected from that, so that you can have people that can study these issues and
Right.
not have to sell it,
Right. Yeah, because I like
on
what he
the market.
says. Yeah, I like what he says a little bit earlier on. He says there were in the past also parties representing ecclesiastical interests against those of monarchs or aristocrats. These too provided a place for dissenting opinions to flourish. In the heat of
Yes.
our political squabbles, we tend to lose sight of the fact that our differences of principle are very small compared to those over which men used to fight. Right?
Yes.
Because it's like we've completely removed a lot of the sort of philosophical discussions, these theological discussions that were very, very important in a lot of political activity back in the day. We're just not going to bother with those. That's not the domain of politics. That's stuff you keep to yourself and don't bother anybody else with.
Mhm.
When really those are very, very impactful things on the existence of a country.
And then when he really gets down to brass tacks of why it's important to have these kind of dissenting views within, informed dissenting views in a university system is on 249, which I thought he
Mm,
really described so it's so important. He says, the most successful tyranny is not the one that uses force to assure uniformity, but the one that removes the awareness of other possibilities, that makes it seem inconceivable that other ways are viable, that removes the sense that there is an outside. And I think, I know on our description of our podcast, we're supposed to be mentioning Tolkien each episode, but I'm religiously mentioning COVID.
hmm
And I think that's what was so dangerous about COVID is that they removed even a possibility of any alternative, and they
Right.
silenced people and they shut down people, and that's
hmm
that's what I think was a big problem with the 2020 election results. Is they just shut it down. They said, well, this is the most secure election in history. The wait, who decided that? That was like 2 weeks ago,
Right.
and they weren't even done counting in some states. And so you can't say that. I mean, you can because they did, but that really is the tyranny, and that's what he's saying is so important to have a university, so you have some outlet for these alternative options, and that would include Marxism and communism. I
hmm
wouldn't want to ban all Marxists from the university. I think there should be one. They all get together and elect one of them. The most effective advocate for Marxism should have a place there. I mean,
Right.
it's an interesting theory. And he talks about how it has a way of blaming society for the wrongs, but excusing any individual from any personal responsibility of the societal problems, which I
Right.
thought was an interesting way
Yeah.
of describing Marxism
Yeah.
because it absolves the individual, but it condemns all of us.
hmm Yeah, I just think it is a very good point, right? Because I think you see that with so many different issues. Is it's like, especially at the university, it's just the other side of the thing isn't even thinkable,
Yes.
right? Because I know I've mentioned to you, I don't know if I've mentioned on the podcast, but like just discussions I've overheard among classmates, just sometimes just outright disparaging Christianity, or just making fun of conservatives. Like they just don't even realize the fact that there could be a conservative Christian person in the room with them. Like
Yes.
the thought just doesn't even cross their mind, right? Because it's like, well, they don't exist here, in a place where you get an education. There's no way such a person would exist here. That's unthinkable. So you see that with just all sorts of different, political, sort of arguments. Is that the one side just does not even know that the other argument is a thing that people believe and might even be believed by the majority of people,
Yes.
and certainly throughout history, right? I mean, things that we all agreed on in society up until like 60 years ago, a lot of
Right.
those are thought to be just completely insane opinions, sort of in the modern day.
In a way, that's a compliment to you, because they think so highly of how you behave and how you interact with them that they couldn't possibly conceive that you'd be so evil as to be a Christian. So it really is, in a way, a compliment to you. Oh,
That's
you're a what? That's what the reaction would be if
uh,
they ever found out.
oh, I thought you were a good person.
Yes, he's really nice.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I had said that. I'm going off a sidetrack. I had a couple friends from high school I hadn't seen in a long time. This is a
Mhm.
couple of years ago. It was pre-COVID, actually, but it was in 2019 or so. I met up with them and we were having a couple of drinks, and I mentioned, I was going to church and that kind of stuff, which I hadn't been for a little bit, when I was really interacting with them. And they were just incredulous,
Mhm.
that anybody would do that. And,
Right.
so, and then I didn't go too far down the rabbit hole because it was just a couple of guys having a couple of beers, but it was kind of like that. Like I thought you were rational. Like,
Yeah.
I guess not. I don't know. I'm not going to argue with you.
Right.
Although, which also surprised them. Uh, so I've changed a little bit from when I was in my early
Oh,
20s.
that's funny. Well, speaking of rational, he brings that up again on 251. He makes a good point there, where he says, sort of in the modern day, it's just reason, reason, reason. Reason is
Yep.
everything, sort of in the limited sense that modernity sees it. But he says, thus, the mere announcement of the rule of reason does not create the conditions for the full exercise of rationality, and removing the impediments to it, some of its supports are also dismantled. Reason is only one part of the soul's economy and requires a balance of the other parts in order to function properly. The issue is whether the passions are its servitors or whether it is the handmaiden of the passions. So he's kind of making a broader point there. Sort of, if we look at reason in the narrow sense, of sort of the scientific view of things and stuff like that, well, that's not going to get you everywhere, right? You need these philosophical, these theological ideas that can be influenced by reason, that are certainly part of reason, maybe. But this sort of strict scientific way of looking at the world is just not going to cut it. Not at all.
Yes.
Yes. No other thoughts there?
No, it's a good summary. I think we've
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
did a good job.
But then he moves on. He says that's essentially the university's task, as he's kind
Yes.
of wrapping up this section a little bit more, where he goes through actually in quite some detail. But he says the university's task is to sort of make that sort of great souled person, to inform the person of more than just sort of the scientific ideas. He says it is in the first place always to maintain the permanent questions front and center. This it
What
does
page are
primarily
you
by 252. This it does primarily by preserving, by keeping alive, the works of those who best addressed these questions. Right? And he talks about Aristotle there for a while. And it's like we have to keep coming back to these questions. These are the questions that people keep asking. And to do that, you have to keep alive the authors who ask the questions. Right? And that's not something you do very often. I know I've complained about my own program here that we don't look at anything older than 150 years old,
right?
generally speaking, and even that's a stretch. But you see that, I think, in a lot of other fields where it's like, yeah, it would be really, really helpful to read this text from this medieval author who talked about this exact issue. But the problem is, well, that was 1,200 years ago, and we don't care about that person anymore. How could they possibly be relevant to the modern day? He says
Right.
that is such an important thing for the university to do, is to keep those things alive, because that's the only place they will be kept alive, is
Yeah.
in the academic setting.
Yeah, and I think he makes a good argument for the university, but I think, well, now with the internet and the ability to have this communication, I don't think, I wonder if there's any subject that I can't learn now just by going on the internet.
Hmm.
Except for like practical stuff. But even then, like I had to change the battery in one of the cars, Eli's car, well, my car that Eli drives. And I didn't this time. I just figured it out because I'd done it
Hmm.
before.
Right.
Not that changing a battery is that complicated, but now with all the electronics and everything, it's really a matter of how do you access it, and what
Right.
snaps are there. And I don't want to break anything while
Hmm.
I'm this thing, because it's not like it used to be. You just loosen the little clips
Hmm.
on the whatever you call it. What do they call those? Where you hook up the wires to
Right.
it.
Yeah. That's still
Yeah,
how it is on my car. It's very easy to
yes,
carry
yes.
my car. It's just sitting right there. You just
Yeah,
take off the two. Yeah.
the Crown Vic, it's easy. You just take
Yeah.
off the anchor that
Yeah.
holds it in place, and you pull off the wires. Boom! This one has electronic gizmos
Right.
plugged into it. But I could have watched. I didn't bother, but I could have watched a YouTube video. I'm sure there's somebody on there that has. This is me taking the battery out and replacing it. And so even with practical stuff, of course, that doesn't teach you how to build something, be a carpenter, an artist,
Right.
or those kind of skills. But as far as intellectual pursuits, I think he's right. We need the universities. We need
Hmm.
that place where people can interact and they can talk. And that's really the argument against like remote
Hmm.
work, is that you don't have those interactions, the team building things, the brainstorming stuff. And so I think there's a place for it, but it's not as important as it once was, because you essentially have the entire library of human knowledge on a device you can hold in your hand.
Right.
Uh, and so, and that was not the case when he wrote this as much,
Hmm.
I access to it, but not like you do now. And so I think there's kind of a counter argument that if this isn't working, there's an alternative. And but having said that, even like Charlie Kirk's organization had academies,
Hmm.
where people come in and they teach them how to do stuff, or they have subject matter classes. So it's like, well, uh, yeah, his whole thing was the university's a scam. Well, under its current
Yeah.
system, I think it's right.
Right.
The amount of money we're paying for it and all that kind of stuff. But
Right.
the concept of university is even adopted by his
Right.
organization in some small level.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what he says here at the end of this section before he moves on to the other topic for today. But he says on
Yeah.
256, he says, to sum up, there's one simple rule for the university's activity. It need not concern itself with providing its students with experiences that are available in democratic society. They will have them in any event. It
Yeah.
must provide them with experiences they cannot have there. Tocqueville did not believe that the old writers were perfect, but he believed that they could best make us aware of our imperfections, which is what counts for us. The universities never performed this function very well. Now they have practically ceased trying. And I think
That's
that's really, really true. And I know we've talked about that before, about how a lot of university education is like basically just living on a resort for 4 years and you take whatever seems kind of fun to you. And it's like, well, that's not an actual education. It shouldn't be a place where you just feel, completely comfortable and you hang out and swim at the pool all day on these, giant, resort park campuses, right? The beauty is important, but if you just turn it into this vacation spot that you could get by going to an all-inclusive resort somewhere else in the world, then that's not really a university, if that's sort of the main
yes.
goal there. Yeah.
Well, it was interesting going on another university tour.
Mm,
So this is a couple of years removed from when I went on a couple of tours with Jonah,
hmm
and it's completely different. So how was Jonah? Jonah's 2 years ago. Is that right? I would have been on tours. He's been
Two
in
or
for,
three
it would have been
years.
three
Yeah.
years ago.
3 years
I've been
ago. Yeah.
touring.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was what, 2022, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So that was right after coming out of COVID, and there were a couple of places you still had to sort of try to make me wear masks at that point, and they'd all adopted this no ACT
hmm
SAT admissions. The Mizzou still has it, but they emphasized this might be the last year for it, and it was an
Right.
alternative admissions, but you're not going to get the automatic scholarships. There's no way to get them.
Right.
Like we said, ACT Bright Flight that you can get if your ACT scores are a certain level. So it was markedly different and much better. Uh, and the university has their student union, which is like their main food court,
hmm
bookstore building, and down below they always want to take. As I've been on, I guess there's been three tours at Mizzou, certainly two. So I went with Sam. This is many years
hmm
ago, and now with Eli, and we did walk through the lower level, which has the multicultural center,
hmm
and that's the LGBTQ center, and then there's a third, like a rape crisis, sexual assault crisis
Yeah.
center.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thing. Now the third one actually has some value. Not to say that the others don't have any value, but come on. But they were much more toned down,
Yeah.
and there wasn't a ton of paraphernalia propaganda on the windows
Right.
at the entrance, and it was like, hey, these are resources for if anybody needs it, wants this or needs it, and it's good to have. It's an accepting campus.
Right.
And I don't have any objection with that, except for it's taxpayer funds on
Right.
what is essentially a religious advocacy. But our tour guide was very good. And he mentioned that he likes the multicultural center. I don't know what his ethnicity was, but it wasn't Irish. Um, but he was a real kind guy.
Right. Right.
And he said, well, he goes there and he knew the director, and he mentioned they're good people and stuff, and so obviously he had some connection to it, but he didn't preach it.
Right.
It's there's something changing,
Yeah.
and quite frankly, I didn't see a single. And I mentioned to you years ago. You always look at the bulletin boards. You get a
hmm
sense of the campus or what events are coming up, and so this is right at the beginning of the school year. I didn't see a single rainbow flag.
Wow.
I didn't see a single join us for LGBTQ event, blah, 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 blah. No anti-Republican anything,
Wow.
no political things whatsoever, actually, on
Hmm.
any of the bulletin boards. And then we did a tour of the engineering school, which is always a lot more business-like.
Right.
Everybody's working, man, those engineers. But I thought that was really interesting, how much it has changed over just a 3-year period to getting back to some sort of, I think, normalcy.
hmm
And I'm a little encouraged by that.
Right. No, that's good. That is a very
Yeah.
good sign. But then move to the second section that he talks about in this chapter here, the relation between thought and civil society, and this is really he's talking about the Enlightenment a lot here, and I think he makes some very good points because he says universities go back very far, but the university as we know it in its content and its aim is the product of the Enlightenment, right? Talking
Yeah.
about sort of the discovery of things just through natural reason. Everything has to be investigated and understood by reason. And he talks about that for a little bit, but I like what he says. This is on page 257 where he says,
Mhm.
Enlightenment was not only, or perhaps even primarily, a scientific project, but a political one. It began from the premise that the rulers could be educated, a premise not held by the Enlightenment's ancient brethren, right? So
I
it's this
had not
idea.
heard that argument before. Had you? That's. I think he's right, but I
Mhm.
hadn't really
Well, I
thought.
think I mentioned something similar. I think just last episode about the Hamilton professor that I know pretty well,
Yeah.
who like hates the term medieval
Yes.
because it like
Yes.
says you're between two better things, and he makes that same exact argument about the Enlightenment. He says, "Well, enlightening from what? From this
Yeah.
from the Dark Ages, where we're bringing
Right.
people back into the light, and that's sort of what he talks about here, where it's this very much more political idea. It's like we can have better rulers, we can have better citizens if people just relied more on their scientific reason."
Yes.
Rather than other things that are hindering them from achieving, full enlightenment.
Like religion.
Like religion, yeah, and I think that was the impulse of a lot of them. I don't think it was super as strong as it is now. Back in the early days of the Enlightenment, a lot of those were still very religious people, but that sort of train of thought led to the position now where you just have outright disparagement of religion as something that can't even be considered in the university.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think in defense of the Enlightenment advocates, the church was more hostile to the scientific method back then. At
Sure.
least a lot of elements of it, depending on which region you were in, especially where there until the Catholic Reformation came around, is a tough place to argue. Hey, we should be able to look into these issues
Hmm.
scientifically, and the truth will out. That was a difficult argument to make in part of the church history, if it went contrary to the accepted church
Hmm.
position on issues. So, in fairness, now it's just hostile to any sort of religious, well, really Christian. And now they don't like the Jews either. Uh, I guess if you're a Muslim, you're all right.
Yeah.
I think they'll defer to you.
I like what he says on 258, sort of continuing on. He says, the Enlightenment thinkers proposed a political science that could be used by founders, such as in America, in establishing principles and arrangements for a sounder and more efficient politics, and a natural science that could master nature in order to satisfy men's needs. Continuing on, he says, a society based on reason needs those who reason best. The scientists were to be the most respected of men, taking the place of kings and prelates, because they are the evident sources of the good things for life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. And
Mhm.
man, is that true now, right? Where it's just, well,
Yes.
look at what this board of governing scientists for this board said about this one thing, and then all of our problems are solved because they have the true scientific answer to this deeply philosophical question that we've been talking about for thousands of years. And it's like, well, look at this board of scientists; they have proved it, and that is the mindset I think of a lot of people in academia.
Well, and it worked to a point
Hmm.
uh, for a long time. When the scientists stayed in their lane, uh, and they didn't politicize the science even. So I think the real turning on that, I think, was most obvious with the climate change stuff,
Right.
which was just politicized science, and as far as the man caused and the remedies for it, especially those two issues. But now, it's like we have to reform all the all the scientific bodies, including like I mean, one of the worst is the American Association. What is it? The Pediatric Doctors
Hmm.
Group. I mean, they're crazy.
Yeah.
And well, the American Bar Association has been known as a left wing organization for at least 20 years,
Hmm.
if not 30. I mean, my entire legal career. So that's three
Yeah.
decades.
I know I've told the story before about the Linguistic Society of America,
Yeah.
right? Which
How is
have
that, how is that
crazy,
political? I
yeah,
mean, I think it's even dumber politically than the ABA.
right,
Where do you get politics out of language?
right.
Well, actually, there is a lot. I guess if you control the words,
Right,
right?
right.
Yeah,
I mean, I think it is very connected to politics, but the way that they do it is just absurd, right? Because I mean, it's the whole story about Steven Pinker about how he was almost kicked out of Linguistic Society of America because he posted some information saying that police brutality isn't necessarily like a white and black problem. It's just a general problem, and we need to have a less police brutality. And that
yeah,
was deemed so incredibly racist. And well, clearly he can't be a respected scientist. He can't be a respected academic if he holds that insane far right position, which I think is just about the most centrist opinion that you can have on any issue. Just saying, hey, the data doesn't really support this conclusion, guys. And it's just crazy. And that's kind of what he talks about here about the academic freedom on 260. Because he goes into that,
yes,
because now we just really don't understand what academic freedom is, right? We have this idea of And he talks about freedom of speech has given way to freedom of expression,
I
in
thought
which
that
the
was a really
obscene,
good one.
yeah,
Yes.
he says, because the obscene gesture enjoys the same protected status as demonstrative discourse, right? And you see that same thing with academics, where it's like, well, everybody's free to say, whatever they want here, but as long as it sort of fits our accepted parameters, right? It's almost kind of the inverse of the freedom of speech in freedom of expression, where you say, well, you can say whatever you want, no matter if it's true or not or whatever. And then in the academy, it's like, well, we have decided what is true before you have even begun to say anything, and
Yeah.
so therefore you can't say anything at all that contradicts our idea of what is true.
Yeah, I think he makes a great point about the freedom of expression
Hmm.
being substantively different than the freedom of speech. Now, I'm a big free speech advocate, so
Hmm.
I don't wanna go down this path. But that distinction makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Where you don't have court rulings if you recognize the difference between expression and speech.
Right.
You don't have court rulings saying that a stripper has a constitutional right to bear her whatevers because she's expressing a concept.
Right.
The same thing. I think the flag burning is probably closer
Hmm.
because you really are conveying an idea. Although I mean, there's controversy about whether that court decision was decided right many years ago. But just to express profanity, like all these people that are jumping on the ice, agents and officers that are cussing them out. And that, I mean, is that speech?
Right.
I guess, or is that just expressing, some profane comment?
Hmm.
Would our society be damaged if somebody went to jail for 30 days for calling a law enforcement officer all sorts of horrible names? I don't
Hmm.
know.
Yeah.
Can't you say, I disapprove of this?
Hmm.
Do you have to threaten them or
Right.
something? I guess
Right.
threats are crimes, but uh, it's just so I'm the more absurd we get down this type of path, the more uncertain I am about absolute free speech rights. It's
Hmm.
unfortunate, because if you have a civilized society, you don't have to debate this issue. You don't even
Right.
have to discuss it because people aren't going to do it.
Right.
But when it becomes chaotic like it is, and people have no norms and there's no shame for this nonsense, like
Hmm.
they're literally taking a child, a documented foreign citizen child molester, somebody who has served a sentence for
Hmm.
molesting a child, been paroled, been ordered to be removed from the country because they're a foreign citizen.
Hmm.
They're never here legally before they raped a child. And now they've been paroled from serving a sentence in America for raping an American child. And there are people protesting the removal of this person. I
Right.
mean, it's
Well,
become
because
absurd. I mean,
it,
I don't understand. I can't get my head around what motivates
hmm.
people under those circumstances. I just
Right.
can't even understand it.
Yeah, because I think the thing there goes back to the idea of like, well, you're not following the set up traditional rules that we've had in place for like
Yes,
70 years or whatever. Even
right.
though in that case that did follow all of the legal procedures that were necessary for the deportation there. But it's that idea. It's like, well, I disagree with your use of the rules in this way. Therefore, the only reason that you could have possibly done this is because you're evil and racist.
Yeah,
And so then it becomes we have to defend this person at all costs. And there's no way that this person could have ever been a bad person to deserve to be kicked out of the country. It's like this person is now a saint. I think you kind of see that a little bit with Jimmy Kimmel
yeah.
being taken off of the air because he made that joke where he was just implying that the guy who killed Charlie Kirk was a right winger.
No, he
Um,
didn't imply it. He said it.
he
He
said it,
said
yeah,
the
because he
MAGA
said,
guy.
yeah, because he said, well, what was the exact quote? He says, like, the right spent the entire past weekend desperately trying to make the shooter seem anything else than one of their own.
Right,
Right? And he
right.
says, well, that's saying you're claiming that he was one of their own, that he was on the right. And so then you have this whole, massive leftist outrage, like I stand with Jimmy Kimmel, right? From nobody even really watches or likes.
Right.
But it was that thing where it wasn't even like the government specifically taking him off the air. It's being framed as this big, government censorship thing. The FCC director said, yeah, there might have been a violation of FCC rules for on-air, transmissions and things like that. But it was really just the parent company of his show that pulled him off because they saw that this might cause problems. And so that was literally just, some hint of maybe government pressure, tiny bit, but it was saying like, well, no, we can't have this guy, spouting lies live on TV.
The Jimmy Kimmel thing for a guy my age, it doesn't make any sense that all these leftists are defending him because I assume you've never seen an episode of The Man Show.
I don't think so.
The Man Show was the most sexist. What's the word for men who hate women?
Misogynist.
Misogynist
Yeah.
show in the history of television. They literally had an episode where they had women in bikinis jumping on trampolines, and they put it in slow motion.
That's ridiculous.
So, and they had the giant beers. There was one guy that drank a beer, like draft beer from a mug, like super fast, like one of those guys. And it was just absurd. And it was all sexist silliness. And, it was very transgressive. You
Right.
say boundary breaking.
Right.
And he was the co-host of it. And I think Adam Carolla, if I remember correctly, was his partner. They were really good friends, comedians. And I think, what they should have done like 10 years ago, somebody should have bought the rights to that and just rebroadcast it. And people would be like, what? This is crazy. That's Jimmy Kimmel. But whatever. I mean,
Right.
I think he was trying to push the envelope to get more publicity or
Right.
whatever. He just hates us.
Yeah, 'cause and it's just one of those things where it's like, well, we have to love that guy who made this horrible show, so many years back, even though it goes against, a lot of what we believe in, because Trump kind of vaguely broke the rules, and therefore we have to stand with him at all costs.
Yeah, it's a strange world.
Yes.
Anyway, let's get back
Very
to
much so. Yes. But back to the book. I mean,
that was interesting.
I don't know. That was, we wound our way over that.
Jimmy Kimmel. It's been funny. That's my problem
Right.
with. I can't. I don't want to stay up late anyway.
Right.
But like Jimmy Fallon was kind of funny for a little bit, but Kimmel hasn't been funny for years.
Well, it's another one of those things where it's just completely co-opted by politics, right? It's your nightly tune in to see somebody make fun of Trump, right? And lie about conservatives. And that was the tradition that was suddenly robbed away from them when Kimmel got pulled. It's like, well, he should be allowed to insult conservatives. That's what we've done for the past, 15 years at least on live TV. Why can't he still be allowed to do that? It's such good content that nobody watches.
But it wasn't funny.
Yeah.
I mean, like there's a way to make fun of Trump.
Oh, yeah.
He's a funny dude.
Yes.
And
It's
even
very
Trump,
easy to make fun of him, actually.
Trump makes fun of Trump.
Yes.
But like tonight, Erica Kirk has beautiful speech honoring her husband and talked about God and Jesus, and she announced that she forgives the shooter.
I saw that.
I mean, holy moly! And then Trump gets up there and he starts just railing on the leftists, these losers. He says, I'm sure Charlie is mad at me, right now for saying this, but you know what? What do you say? Like, I am who I am. I can't change now. And the crowd's kind of giggling along with them. And he's just he has such comedic timing in that moment. It was just, and all the media is going to pick up on that.
Right.
Because it was really kind of jarring to watch her speech, which was, and what was really interesting. I'm sorry to go down this tangent, but what was really interesting was she announces that, and obviously she started choking up, I mean, what a powerful statement to make, and she's a stronger person than I would be. Anyway, but the entire crowd, just a few people first, but then the entire crowd gave her a standing ovation.
Wow.
For forgiving this person who would have generally gladly murdered everybody in that room.
Yeah.
Like if he had the choice, okay, I'm going to take this one shot at Charlie Kirk and murder him, or I could press this button and this entire stadium gets blown up. I think he'd take the button. From what limited I know about him, based on his philosophy and all that. And all of them were cheering her for forgiving the guy that murdered her husband like 10 days ago. I mean,
Right.
it was such a beautiful thing,
Hmm.
really. And I think, I don't know. I don't know what to think about it.
Yeah,
Uh, it was really sweet, actually.
yeah,
Yeah. Anyway,
yeah. No, no, I agree. I agree.
so it gives me a little hope about
Hmm.
society. How, yeah, I think part of it was they were cheering to support her,
Hmm.
like she was being vulnerable. But I think there are a lot of, fundamentalist Christians really, but really more so than anybody. Like there's a certain segment of the population that can't serve as jurors in a criminal case. And,
Hmm.
and I've found them, like when I was a prosecutor, because I made the mistake once in not asking this question, but as a prosecutor, you have to ask, is there anybody here that because of religious or philosophical reasons, they can't sit in judgment of another human being. They won't be able to find someone guilty because they think that's God's job to judge people, and they can't render a verdict of guilt because they will not sit in judgment of another human being. And almost every time when I start asking that, I get one hand up. There'd
Hmm.
be at least somebody, and it was always a fundamentalist. I mean, I don't mean that as a bad
Right.
term. It's a bad term, but it's one of those Christian super biblical Christians that would say, "No, I'm not. I can't do it.
Yeah.
It's not my place."
Right.
Wow, that's pretty wild.
Right.
So I'm sure there's a lot of those people in that audience
Right.
today.
No, I
Mhm.
agree. I agree.
All
But
right, back
moving,
to yeah,
yes, back to the book, because then he talks for a little bit about sort of just the general path of philosophy here. Going back all the way
to the Republic, your
yeah, to
favorite
the
book.
Republic and to Socrates and things. It's not my favorite book, but I do enjoy it. But he says, the
My favorite. No,
yes,
it's not.
you see in the Enlightenment and sort of these modern thinkers now is that they start to really just rag on all of the people who came before them, right? Because
Yes,
it's like all of these former, medieval and ancient authors, they're talking about virtue all the time, but people aren't becoming more virtuous, right? They're talking about the
yes.
importance of education and civil society, and things are just getting worse. Clearly, we need something different, right? And we need to sort of mix up this theoretical life that we have. And so that's when you get this idea of the Enlightenment. We need to be woken up, emerge from the cave, and see something that really has practical effects, right? And that sort of transplants into the idea of the university as that changes, where you are now moving away from discussions of virtue and these sort of philosophical topics and looking more practically, sort of hands-on type things, again, in line with what we've been talking about here. And that is really how you get removed from the cave and you start to see the true light, is moving away
Mhm.
from these older
Yeah.
philosophies.
Well, and he says, and maybe I'm skipping ahead too
No,
much,
no,
but
that's right.
266, he says, what the Republic actually teaches us is that none of this is possible and that our situation requires both much compromise and much intransigence,
Hmm.
great risk and few hopes. The important thing is not speaking one's own mind, but finding a way to have one's own mind,
Hmm.
to have your own mind, to be able to be a free thinking individual and be able to reason things. And I hadn't read that type of description of it. I do appreciate that. I was no fan of the book. I mean, maybe just because I'm too stupid to understand it, I guess. But he goes on. He says, but here I'm only indicating the unity of the tradition that enlightenment is an attempt to give political status to what Socrates represents. So they're trying to, this philosopher that believes in the higher thought and higher virtue and is willing to fight for it or give his life for that type of truth seeking
Right.
and that type of challenging of the gods of the day, the political or religious beliefs of the day,
Hmm.
and that is like the ideal
Right.
of the university free thinker,
Hmm.
person based upon reason. Yes.
And that's what he says. They've essentially just completely perverted, Socrates' idea. They claim to be following in his tradition, but he says, and then you see this, this attempt in the Enlightenment to remove the religious passion from politics, resulting in distinctions like that between church and state, and that's motivated by the wish to prevent the highest principle in political life from being hostile to reason, right? So it's like always we want to have this really well reasoned to build up this mind here. But he says in the next paragraph, he says, the Enlightenment thinkers took on his case, Socrates' case, and carried on a war against the continuing threat to science posed by first causes that are irrational or beyond reason. The gradual but never perfect success of that war turns the desire to be reasonable into the right to be reasonable, into academic freedom. In the process, political life was rebuilt in ways that have proved intolerable to many statesmen and thinkers and have gradually led to the reintroduction of religion and the irrational in new and often terrifying guises. This is what Socrates would have feared, right? He says
Yeah.
that's exactly what you've done. You've made religion, or not religion, you've made reason into its own kind of religion. You've
Yes.
made it this unfalsifiable thing. You've made it this thing that cannot stand, can't be compared to anything else. We can have no sort of connection between that and, actual religion and things like that. Like it has to stand on its own, and that is sort of the only principle in our society. You have made it into an idol, right? Where you were criticizing, traditional religions as idols themselves that are, inhospitable to reason, that you have made reason itself unreasonable.
Yes. I saw an interesting excerpt. I hadn't seen it before of Larry King interviewing Norm Macdonald. And Norm Macdonald was talking about faith and reason.
Hmm.
And I got to rewatch it again because he was saying that he has more, he has more, um, it takes more faith to believe in science than it does to believe in God.
Yeah,
And I had never heard that argument before. I have to go back and listen to it again. But it's a similar type of thing. I mean, a lot of this, the arguments about reason, that's all well and good, but you can't reason uh, by scientific method alone how to live a good life.
right,
I
right.
mean, there's some things that you can't study
Mhm.
as science. Now you can say, well, statistically you have to do this and this, if
Right.
you have these factors. Well, especially if you're a young person, a young single person, one of the factors of having a happy life is to get married. But how
Yeah.
the hell do you find,
Right.
find somebody to marry?
Right.
And there's no
Mhm.
scientific method for figuring that out unless you're going to be super manipulative,
Right.
and that doesn't work either.
Yeah. Well, I had this discussion not too long ago. I forget with who it was with. I've had the same discussion multiple times. I think it was with originally with that same Hamilton professor I was talking about earlier, where talking about all these people who say, well, everything in the world can eventually be explained by reason, right? Just sort of empirical tests will explain
Yeah.
everything, right? All these
Determin
unexplained things.
yeah,
Right.
determinism.
Right.
Yeah.
Essentially, yeah. Or very like strict physicalism, right? Everything is in matter and things like that. And so what this professor pointed out, and I thought this is really, really great. He says, provide an empirical test, construct an empirical test that proves that everything has to be empirically testable. You
Mm,
cannot do that. There's no test that you can do to prove why everything has to be empirically testable. If you
yeah.
can argue with reason about why things are better, if there's an empirical test for them, you can say, well, look at this. I can explain things in this way by using statistics and by measuring things. But by doing that, you're moving into philosophy. That's not an empirical test. You're providing a philosophical argument for why empirical tests are better than sort of philosophical reasoning or whatever. But you're doing it by means of philosophical reason. There's no empirical test that proves that everything needs to be empirically testable. That is just a value that you hold, and it might be
Yes.
a reasonable value to hold, but that goes beyond an empirical test in the first place.
Interesting.
And there's many
Uh,
other such things like that. It's like, well, if everything has to be this way, prove that it has to be that way by using the principles you set up. And usually you can't do that.
I'm having the same experience that I had when I was an undergrad. I've famously had a philosophy degree. But like a year
You are a
before I graduated,
philosopher, even.
yes, I'm a philosopher, attorney, and poet,
Yes.
but I haven't written any poetry. It's still locked. It's still locked within me.
Oh my
I
gosh.
have to find the release, to find the key to unlock the
Hmm.
poetry. Um, but I got bored with it in the sense that I realized none of these they don't have any answers.
Right.
Like if you look at the history of philosophy, as we did in previous episode or season, it's one theory, and then the second theory kind of refutes the first theory a little
Mhm.
bit or expands on it or says, I don't think that it doesn't work because of this reason. You have the next guy say, well, that doesn't work because of this reason,
Hmm.
and there's no answers. There's you study philosophy, you have maybe you have a process that you can use to find the answers somewhere, but just studying philosophy doesn't get you anywhere. And as I'm kind of becoming more of an intellectual in the sense that I'm reading a lot more than I had previously in my life. I have more time. I only have one kid at the house now, so and he's only playing one sport. So we were talking about that this weekend. Like you remember when we had four kids playing soccer and we
Hmm.
had to tag team them? The whole weekend's eaten up with that, which was great. Yeah, I'd say it was bad. It was great, but now I have time to read. So the more intellectual I'm getting, the more anti-intellectual I am. I don't know what that means. Like, because you read this and you're like, ah, gosh, God, but he makes I like his arguments supporting
Hmm.
a university system. I agree with his arguments, but then part of me is like, yeah, but do we really need it?
Right.
Do we really need a university system?
Right.
I don't know that we do.
Mm.
I mean, why don't we just have, I mean, we could have trade schools to teach actual trades.
Hmm.
I mean, you need a school to teach a paramedic how to be a paramedic. But
Right.
a lot of that is on the job, like the ride-alongs. I mean, the clinicals.
Right.
You're the healthcare field. A lot of what your university experience is the clinicals, like
Right.
actually treating patients with supervision. I mean, do we really need this full-blown university system? I mean, I bet you like 50% of the people that go to college now don't need to go to college.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, for what?
absolutely.
I mean, to get a business degree,
Hmm.
what do that's what a lot of my friends were doing back in the 80s and early 90s, getting business degrees. Now, accounting, I could see, because you have certain forms and processes you have to
Right.
follow. But, can you really learn to be an effective manager by going to college?
Hmm. Yep.
Actually, you learn by being a manager of people.
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of becoming anti-university, while at the same time I value it.
Right.
It's contradictory. I get it, but I think it almost needs to be scaled back to its core mission again.
Yeah. And absolutely. And I think that's, I mean, I haven't read, beyond the point where we're at in the book now, but I'm thinking that that'll be his conclusion, right? That there will be some
Mhm.
method of steps on how we can reclaim that true purpose of it. 'Cause I think that the purpose of it is good and is necessary in a society. But the problem is like, does it actually exist anywhere in our modern society except for like pockets of very small schools that are very committed to that sort of mission? But it's like, how do we get back to that?
Yeah,
Um,
and I think I guess I'd say is there's pockets within each university. No matter how
right.
bad they
Right.
are, there's going to be some good in there. Some really talented writer who's working on these issues and publishing good stuff and teaching. An excellent teacher. One of my best teachers was taught logic and logic and language classes, and he actually taught math. He was a math major, but I
Hmm.
guess he also had a philosophy degree. So he did both. He taught calculus and he taught logic. But best teacher I had. He's a really good, really talented teacher. But I mean, there's a lot of I don't know, a lot of dead weight there. A lot of people going to college, they're wasting such a prime time of their life.
Hmm.
From 18 to 22 or longer for some of it, uh, and to pursue what? Now, I think if you're an excellent student like
Hmm.
yourself, it makes sense because you're pursuing it, and that has value. But if you're, like I was, like a B and C student, what the hell was I wasting my time there? I mean, nothing, nothing I learned in undergrad. In fact, yeah, I shouldn't say that. Law school was kind of a waste of time too. It should have just been an apprenticeship
Right.
because that's when I learned to be a lawyer.
Right. Yeah.
Was when I became a lawyer. And so when I'm hiring people, it's almost like they have to unlearn whatever they learned in law school.
Hmm.
That's like the first 6 months
Right.
is to teach them how to be a lawyer and not whatever the hell they learned in law school.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a big problem. Very big problem.
Yes.
Because I know we've talked about that before, but there's so many people who, go through high school and things like that, being told that the only path forward is to college, and they get to college, they don't have any idea of what they want to study. They get a useless degree, they go into a lot of debt for it, and then they're just straddled with that, and they don't do anything with that degree for the rest of
Right.
their lives. But it's all because they were just pushed down that path. And now, even if they were pushed down it in a different society where the university would have been more beneficial to them and it wasn't so useless, even that wouldn't have been as bad, even if they were sort of pushed into it. But now we have the double
Yeah.
effect of people being pushed into it, and the university itself is very bad.
I guess I'd push back against your pushed into it.
Mm.
I think the parents, feel pressure, but
Hmm.
I think a lot of the students really like the 4 years of partying.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah.
And so that's my biggest objection with the student loan forgiveness is that they're living on these resorts
Hmm.
and we're going to forgive them for the room and board charges. I don't think so.
Right.
Maybe the tuition. I could see that as long as the universities have to have some skin in that game.
Right.
I can see forgiving tuition, student loan debt, but the living expenses when they're living on these resorts and some working class guy who's an auto mechanic who went to trade school for like 6 months and been working his tail off in 100-degree heat
Hmm.
and changing oil. He's got to pay for their party town
Hmm.
down at the University of Southern Florida for 4 years. Are you crazy?
Yeah.
Anyway. So
Yeah.
I completely got off on a
No,
tangent.
no, I think that's it's very much related here, but I think that is a good place to stop unless you have any other thoughts.
I am out.
All right. Well, this what's so sad about that. This is season
I'm running
12.
on empty.
This has been season 12, episode 13 of Unlimited Opinions. I have been Adam Bishop,
I'm still Mark Bishop.
and you can, of course, follow us on Twitter at ULMTD Opinions.